hope I learned something. I hope I learned something. I hope I learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome to the daily All Hat No Cattle News Rodeo. I'm your host, Hat, and as you can see behind me, no cattle to be found. I do have a lot of news for you today, though. An update on the Tiger Woods rollover crash from last month. Also, a lot of COVID news, but most importantly, the infrastructure bill that was promoted yesterday during a stand-up event by 46 Asterisk in Pittsburgh, where he stumbled all over himself yet again and almost fell up the stairs on Air Force One once again. Whoever thought that a 78-year-old man carrying the world's largest umbrella and the world's largest carry-on bag up the steps to a 747 was a good idea, I don't know. But once again, he almost fell. Praise be to God. Let's get into it, though. We're probably going to go long today, folks, as a big news day. And again, the infrastructure and the border and the after show are going to take up a lot of time. So let's just jump right in. Our Babylon Bee bookend. This is the one on the left from their politics section. Vendors selling bricks, Molotovs outside Derek Chauvin trial. And here we can see a picture of an enterprising young man in front of a courthouse wearing a paper Black Lives Matter vendor hat and a BLM Incorporated t-shirt. holding a box of Molotov cocktails and bricks. That box is, of course, labeled Peaceful Devices, and there are prices listed on the front of the box. Let me blow it up for you, for those of you who are watching video who can see. Justice Fluid is $25. Equality blocks are $10. And it says at the bottom, ask about our pallet rates. And there is an arm outstretched with 3 $100 bills ready to start doing some business. Let me get the, I can't shrink it now. There we go. Okay, Dateline, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bricks, get your bricks here. 2 for 10, 2 for 10, cries John Braxton, 42, as he mills through a Minneapolis crowd gathered outside a courthouse. Fine bricks, get your fine bricks here. Braxton, like dozens of other concession vendors down on their luck after a year of low attendance and no attendance sports games, has come to Minneapolis to sell his wares to the crowds waiting outside the Derek Chauvin's murder trial. Instead of popcorn and cotton candy, though, he's selling bricks, Molotov cocktails, and pitchforks. He's turned in his Cracker Jacks for brass knuckles, his beer for bricks, and his Minnesota Twins foam fingers for foam fingers reading Black Lives Matter. Said Braxton, honestly, I'm going to make a fortune, as he sold 10 bricks to a white kid visiting from Portland for the show and riot. Quoting Braxton again, these guys are going to riot no matter what happens in the trial here, so I'm going to make out like a bandit. Close quote. A 17-year-old Antifa rioter then waved that he wanted 2 bricks, and Braxton hurled them in his direction. Unfortunately, the Antifa rioter never had a father figure in his life, and so didn't know how to catch them, and was hit square in the face. Oops, sorry, son, Braxton said. Molotovs, get your Molotovs, hottest mollies around, he called out as he moved on through the crowd, selling his goods in hopes of a better life, the Babylon Bee, everyone. You'll notice, by the way, that I have been studiously ignoring the Chauvin trial. It is a circus. I will wait and maybe do updates once the defense starts its case. I may not. All that we know for sure is that, as I just read in this Babylon Bee article, and once again, they portend the future better than almost anyone, no matter what the outcome of the trial will be, Minneapolis will burn again. And I'm sorry to say that. Sorry to say that. All right, moving right along. And hello, Debsong02 to the chat. Okay, my personal conceit, the market. The market just closed, and the Dow was up just under 0.5% today, closing above the 33,000 mark yet again. The S&P 500 had a very strong day, closing above 4,000. It was up over 1.25%. The Nasdaq led the charge, closing well above 13,000, inching in on the 13,500 market, up over 1.75%. Gold actually saw a rise today, getting well above the $1,700 an ounce mark for a change. Crude oil was the big winner all across the board, going up over 3.5%. It is now at $61.26 per barrel of West Texas Intermediate sweet crude. And Bitcoin is holding its own at just under 59,000 per coin at this moment in time. Now, speaking of oil, it's not a coincidence that oil had such a sharp rise today, because you may or may not know, New York City has been in federal court trying to hold 5 major oil companies liable for costs to quote unquote address harm caused by global warming. Those companies are British Petroleum, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and Royal Dutch Shell. Pretty much the 5 largest petroleum companies in the world. Royal Dutch Shell being the oldest, in case you were wondering. But the Manhattan District Court of Appeals, Second District Court, said no. No, no, and no, we're not going to allow you to proceed with this lawsuit. Quoting Circuit Judge Richard Sullivan, global warming presents a uniquely international problem of national concern. It is therefore not well suited to the application of state law. And there you have it. There you have it. So that's thrown out the window. Let's see what else New York City comes up with to ruin the world. All right, the infrastructure plan. I'll be getting to Tiger Woods in a minute. Not a lot to say there, but I teased it, and I will certainly get to it.
So-called infrastructure, that word is very popular.
Facebook.
It's a Trojan horse.
Phony.
A Trojan horse to reverse.
It did that to me earlier, too. Hey, let me pause this and get back to where it's supposed to be. Sorry about that, folks. This is the first time I've ever used Facebook as a source. This is the only place I could find these two clips, and it keeps auto-launching on me. I do apologize. So anyway, the infrastructure bill, quote-unquote infrastructure bill. Once again, 46 asterisk labels something that isn't what he says it is. We all know about the American Rescue Act or fund or plan, whatever that $2 trillion debacle from last 2 weeks ago was. That was nothing to do with COVID except for maybe 8 or 9% of it. The rest was handouts to blue states, handouts to blue cities, and demands that states not use the money handed to them that they had already put in, less what they had been given to the blue states, and they could not use that money, quote unquote, given to them by the federal government to offset taxes. By the way, 46 asterisk is being sued in federal court over that. We'll have to see how that shakes out. A number of states have sued over that provision in that plan. So now we've got the quote unquote infrastructure plan. Technically, the American, pardon me, let me get here. The American Jobs Act is what it's called. American Jobs Act. Here's the thing. It's Green New Deal wrapped up in something called infrastructure. There's all kinds of carve-outs for quote-unquote green energy, shovel-ready projects that I talked about yesterday. And there's going to be huge, massive sit-down of federal regulations on building projects. I saw a graph, by the way. The federal government owns about, I think, 5% of the U.S. infrastructure system. 5%. 60% of the U.S. infrastructure system is held by private outfits, corporations, small businesses, things like that. 60% of the U.S. infrastructure is held by private business. President Trump's plan, the $800 billion plan, back in 2018 or 19, I believe it was said to be too big too soon, even though President Trump was going to be leaning on private and corporate financing for the majority of the project. So now we have an at least $2 trillion plan coming out of this administration, and the left is crowing about how progressive it is and how it's the greatest thing since the Great Society and the New Deal, both of which, of course, ruined the economy. And just look at the black community and what the Great Society has done for it, and you can see that another plan based on that and the New Deal. I keep wanting to say Green New Deal, the New Deal, which extended the Depression and extensive unemployment for at least 8 years after it would have recovered if Roosevelt had just gotten his foot off the neck of private business and allowed capitalism to do its job. Here we are all over again, folks. The Democrats never learn. I've got a very extensive article here from the Daily Wire by Ben Zeisloft. I'm not going to read all of it. It does break down this quote-unquote infrastructure bill really well. And again, they're saying $2 trillion right now. It's going to be more than that because they're talking about subsidizing child care, free college, community college, trade school. I'm all for free trade school. I will say that. But a very small portion of this thing is actually dedicated to infrastructure. And as you can see here, I'll hit a couple of these points. $621 billion out of this $2 trillion minimum package is for roads and bridges, public transport, rail service, electric vehicles, and ports. $621 billion out of at least $2 trillion is actually for infrastructure. But get this. Part of this funding will involve money, quote, to improve air quality, limit greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce congestion. And there will also be a $115 billion carve-out for roadways, and $20 billion of that will be for states and localities to improve road safety, quote, especially for cyclists and pedestrians. And as we all know, that's exactly what every city in this country needs is sidewalks and bike lanes. They've already done that, for crying out loud. I will say there are areas around here where they do need sidewalks, but there's no room for them. They're already widening the road as it is. If they'd put a sidewalk in earlier, they'd be ripping that sidewalk out and have to lay it down all over again. It's along a very, very busy stretch of road. There's no reason to be walking along it. a number of people have been killed trying to walk along that stretch of road, and now they're widening it to 3 lanes each side. It's just going to get worse. In fact, the section of road I'm talking about is called Highway 50, also known as 75. Everything up here is named twice. Going through the middle of Kenosha out to the interstate, all the way from the harbor to the interstate. It's the busiest stretch of road in Wisconsin, and has been for quite some time. And now they're widening a part of it to 3 lanes each side. And as I've said before on the show, whenever you increase the width or the capacity of a extant roadway, it fills up again. Congestion doesn't go away. Congestion always is limited by the amount of traffic people are willing to put up with. If a road is too congested, they'll find an alternate route. Once you widen the road and it becomes less congested, all those people will come back. And the congestion starts right back up over again. It happens every time. Every single time. But there are huge carve-outs in this bill also for, quote, households of color. It says here that those people are twice as likely to take public transportation. So there's $105 billion in this plan for the DOT to fix 24,000 buses, 5,000 rail cars, and 200 stations. Now, Congress just allocated $20 billion to mass transit through the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan that we just talked about. And there was $14 billion for the same projects passed in December for the last stimulus bill, quote unquote, under the Trump administration. It keeps going and going and going. And as we all know, mass transit is mainly located in blue states because blue cities are normally Democrat. By far and away, cities are normally Democrat. They have the highest per capita public transportation, which is often not used anywhere near fully, except in certain areas. And it's just more money after bad, more money after bad. They're proposing a $174 billion injection into the electric vehicle market. They're going to replace 50,000 diesel transit vehicles and electrify at least 20% of the yellow school bus fleet. A $25 billion dollar investment in airports and $17 billion in the port system. Get this though, the port system renovations include, quote, a healthy ports program to mitigate the cumulative impacts of air pollution on neighborhoods near ports, often communities of color. And the legislation also includes $20 billion for, and I'm quoting again, a new program that will reconnect neighborhoods cut off by historic investments and ensure new projects increase opportunity, advance racial equity and environmental justice, and promote affordable access. Now, there's also some good things in here. They're talking about expanding the broadband system in the country to cover all of it. There's $200 billion in that. But for some reason, in an infrastructure bill, there's $213 billion for building, preserving, and retrofitting more than 2 million homes and commercial buildings to address the affordable housing crisis. How will retrofitting an existing home fix an affordable housing crisis? We've talked about this before. Affordable housing is in trouble in certain areas because of building restrictions, because of codes, things like that. We've heard time and time again about LA County wanting to build large facilities for the homeless to get them off the streets. And what happens? The NIMBYs kick in and say, we don't want that in our neighborhood. And even if the city can find space for it, the building regulations are such that these things cost tens of billions of dollars over their projected original costs. They take years longer to complete than they normally do, and by the time they're finally built, they're too expensive to run. It's happened time and time again. So I have no idea where this is supposed to help. They're also talking about building and rehabilitating over 500,000 homes for low and middle income buyers by offering $20 billion in tax credits through the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. And the legislation will also use $40 billion to improve the infrastructure of the public housing system in America to disproportionately benefit women, people of color, and people with disabilities. So since I'm a cripple, I guess that means I've got money coming. Good, I'm looking forward to it. Give me a break. Give me a break. $400 billion for the quote-unquote care infrastructure, which is the home care industry. Somehow $400 billion for home care is an infrastructure package. This is complete wish listing by the Democrats. They want all of society to be so dependent upon the federal government that they can't function on their own. And I haven't even gotten into the tax hikes that are coming yet. Just wait till I get into that. A full $180 billion into R&D. Wow, thanks. $180 billion for R&D. They're putting $400 billion towards expanding access to quality, affordable home or community-based care for aging relatives and people with disabilities, but we only get $180 billion for R&D. Excellent. Great plan. Great plan. There's also a whole thing in here about throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at HCBUs. I don't have a problem with HCBUs getting money. You remember that President Trump was the first president to ever fund them well and above their projected costs for years, as opposed to making them come to the White House every year and beg for money like Obama did. President Trump was the first president to fund HCBUs above and beyond their requests and did so for several years in a row. He made that a thing. That was one of the very first things he did in office. But now we're supposed to be supporting them to become research incubators. Well, why them? Do they have research departments? Or are we going to be building those from scratch and telling MIT and Stanford to go shove it because they're not historically black? Again, I'm not adverse to investing in any educational system in this country, but are we putting the cart before the horse? I think we are. Of course, the big one here, corporate tax increase. You remember President Trump in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 shifted the corporate tax rate from 35%, which is one of the highest in the world, to 21%, which put us near the lowest in the world. And we saw what it did for the economy. We saw what it did for jobs. We saw what it did for tax revenues. It absolutely exploded all of those. Now, Joe Biden, of course, lied about this during his speech yesterday, and I'll get into that in a moment. But Biden is now talking about raising the corporate tax rate to 28%. So, what will that do? Let's move along. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. One thing I looked up specifically about this bill is nuclear power, because they keep talking about carbon zero emissions by 2030, 2035. They keep moving the goalposts back and forth. But it's still net carbon zero emissions is what this administration keeps crowing about. And remember, they said that they weren't for the Green New Deal during the campaign. But you look at this bill, and it is all Green New Deal, folks. It is Green New Deal left, right, and center, with just a few pullbacks. But one of the things I looked specifically for were mentions of nuclear power, because that's what we need to go carbon neutral without heavily relying on totally inefficient, unreliable, and ultimately failure-prone, quote-unquote, green energy like solar and wind. We know that that doesn't work. When the weather gets bad, those things freeze up. Solar panels do not work in cold weather at all, and you can't recycle them. Once they wear out, and solar panels wear out, you have to throw them away in landfills. They can't be recycled, and that is rare earth waste. And windmills, they're only good for 10 years, and you have to bury that stuff too, because you can't recycle those either unless you pay a lot of money to refurbish them and then sell them at a loss on the overseas market. And where does a lot of this stuff come from? China. Supposedly, this bill will make it more feasible for U.S. companies to mine rare earth minerals here in the U.S. Supposedly. We'll see if that actually happens. But I found in this breakdown of this proposed bill, I found 3 instances where the word nuclear came up. 3. So let me read you a little excerpt of this. This is from EEnews.net. And let me see what it says here. Biden is also asking for $35 billion for climate research and development, including launching the Advanced Research Projects Agency Climate to develop new methods for reducing emissions and building climate resilience. Some observers, including the American Action Forum, a center-right policy institute, have warned that the agency would, and I'm quoting, simply duplicate the efforts of current government agencies, pointing to the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy. Again, we've already got an agency doing this stuff, but since it says climate on the end of it, that makes it woke. Continuing. The infrastructure plan calls for $15 billion in demonstration projects for climate R&D priorities, including utility-scale energy storage, hydrogen, advanced nuclear, floating offshore wind, quantum computing, and electric vehicles, among other technologies. $15 billion for all of that. That isn't even a drop in the bucket. That is spitting into the ocean. $15 billion for all of that. And let me say one thing about hydrogen real quickly. You know how you get hydrogen? You take water, you run electricity through it, and then you split the hydrogen atoms off from the oxygen atoms. And you capture the gases in separate areas, and that gets you your hydrogen. So how do you power a hydrogen fuel vehicle? You have to run electricity through water. Where are you going to get that electricity from? A hydrogen generator? Well, no, because you had to make electricity to make that hydrogen. It's a loss. You don't save electricity through hydrogen systems. You lose electricity through hydrogen systems. It's a complete and utter failure. It sounds great on paper, but once you actually apply the math to it, it's a loss. It's always going to be a loss. $15 billion for all that, including advanced nuclear. So in other words, they have no intention of fortifying the nuclear structure in this country. So, some other things going down with this. Here's an article from the Daily Wire by May Reed McArdle. The bill makes the U.S. uncompetitive, funds favored industries friends, and it's absolutely handing things out to state and local governments as opposed to people who know how to build things. The federal government is going to be in charge of these projects, which means top-down bureaucracy, which means patronage, which means buddy-buddy, which means you wash my back, I'll wash yours. But here's the part of this thing that a lot of people aren't talking about. Again, reading from the article. Tucked into the administration's summary of the bill is also the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, a major overhaul of federal law that includes forcing workers to pay union dues even if they opt out. We know that this administration is in the pockets of the unions. Yet, when it comes to unions like the pipe fitters and the welders unions, it takes away their jobs and leaves the union heads scratching their heads, wondering what happened. We backed him in the election, even though he said he was going to take away our jobs, and he took away our jobs. Gee, how'd that happen? The only people whose jobs are being protected right now are the teachers, because of the teachers' unions, the NEA and the ATF. And I have a lawsuit filed in California against the LA School District's Teachers Union. We'll be getting to that in the second half of the show. But yeah, they're literally trying to reverse Janus, a Supreme Court ruling that said unions cannot collect dues from non-union members. That is settled Supreme Court case law. I thought the Democrats were all for it was an injury stasis. I can't remember it now. Laura, help me out with that. Where if a precedent should be left standing. That's what they always scream when you talk about canceling Roe v. Wade, that it's supposed to stay because it's standing case law. Now this is literally seeking to overturn Janus, that only came out a few years ago. So, as I said, Biden stood in front of two people, probably in Pittsburgh yesterday, There were more flags in that room than there were people. And he introduced this insanity that he's calling an infrastructure bill. Now, of course, President Trump lives rent-free in Joe Biden's mind. Joe Biden has done everything he can from the very first second his butt sat behind the Resolute desk, which, by the way, I didn't know until very recently, was a gift from Queen Victoria. I did not know that. I thought it was Lincoln's desk. Turns out not. But Biden has done everything he can to erase anything Trump did to help this country. And he's doing a pretty good job of it. Now, we know that the Washington Post has called him out for 4 Pinocchios twice this week alone because Biden keeps lying about Bill 202 from Georgia, the election bill that had some election reforms and then also widened voting opportunities. Of course, we're told it was Jim Crow 2.0. Joe Biden called it sick, and pernicious during his one and only and quite laughable press conference. Well, now, as I said, Biden wants to raise corporate taxes by 7%, thereby putting our corporate tax rate above, guess whose? China's. Biden is actually encouraging investment in China because you'd get a better return than you would here in the U.S. That is what this would do. But Biden has to make a case for his tax increase. So the only thing he can compare it to is Trump's tax cut that we just mentioned a little bit ago. Now, what is the Democrat talking point on the Trump tax cut? That it only favored the wealthy, that the top 1% got 83% of the tax breaks, which is a complete and utter lie. Also, that it raised taxes for the middle class. Only about 10% of the middle class saw a tax raise under the Trump plan. The average tax savings per household was $5,000. And the bottom 25% of the tax bracket saw the greatest increases in wages, in earnings, and in wealth after that tax cut came out, right up to when last year's shutdowns hit. But if Biden says any of that, then his tax increase will look like a really stupid idea, which it is. So he only has one choice, and that is to lie through his teeth yet again. He's already gotten 2 pants on fires, 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post this week over Bill 202. And here he goes, lying about the Trump tax cuts.
Congress passed a tax cut of $2 trillion, increasing the national debt $2 trillion. It didn't meet virtually any of the predictions it would in terms of growing the economy. Overwhelmingly, the benefits of that tax package went to the wealthiest Americans. It was bad for American competitiveness, deeply unfair to the middle-class families, and wrong for our future.
Okay, I didn't lead this in quite properly. You'll excuse me. Now let's hear from Larry Kudlow as to how all that's a bunch of lies. By the way, I'm going to have another piece from this interview he did with Laura Ingraham last night on the Ingraham Angle. It was a great hit, a really great hit. I highly suggest you go to foxnews.com and look up the replay from last night. I can't play all of it, but it's really good stuff. I have this and another smaller piece after this. So here's Larry Kudlow, former White House economic advisor, talking about what 46 Asterisk just said.
Larry, is any of this true?
No, there's not a single factoid in that statement. The tax cuts were the biggest benefits, the increase in middle income wages and family income and blue collar workers, and the increase in lower middle income. In fact, Laura, it's the bottom 25 percentile of the income scale that absolutely did the best, not the top in terms of wealth and wages and incomes. They did the best. The best performance probably since the year 2000. Now, look.
So, I think that puts that to rest pretty well, don't you think? Pretty well did that there. All right, let's continue on. So I have a few seconds of Larry wrapping this hit up, where he talks about the phrase that is most commonly used to describe this quote-unquote infrastructure bill, and that is a Trojan horse. Mitch McConnell has used it. It's pretty much become the main Republican talking point, and I think to good effect. It perfectly sums up this bill. And I'm going to talk about how the Democrats are going to try to sneak it through with 50-50 with a tie-breaking vote. But let's get to Larry's summing up this Trojan horse of a bill. Oh, sorry, he's muted. Excuse me just a second. Come on, Facebook. I've never used Facebook as a source before, and now I know why. Let's try it again. It keeps taking away the speaker. Here, let me refresh it. Let's see, 442 is where I want to go.
Well, look,
there we go.
You know, at the root of...
Okay, I do apologize. Again, I've never used Facebook as a source before, and I will try very, very hard to never use it again. Quality live programming here on the All Hat No Cattle News Rodeo. Here we go.
Very beginning, this so-called infrastructure, that word is very popular. It's a Trojan horse.
Phony.
A Trojan horse to reverse the Trump tax cuts, a Trojan horse to put in the Green New Deal, and a Trojan horse for a remarkable expansion of the welfare state with no work requirements.
Yeah,
this is an ideological battle from the far, far left.
And that, you can't sum it up any better than that. I would try, but I'm not Larry Kudlow, and he is the man. I would like to once again thank Non-Fake News for hosting the All Hat No Cattle Daily News Rodeo. Very kind of you. Now with 30 viewers watching. That is awesome of you, sir. Please let me know in the chat if you can when your show hosts. If you do a regular show, I'm afraid I don't know. I do apologize, but I would love to host it when you're on. I would very much like to do that. It seems only fair. Thank you again. All right, moving right along with the show. So President Trump, of course, had something to say about this Trojan horse, if I may continue with that term. I've got a piece here from the Washington Examiner by Rob Crilly, their White House correspondent, which quotes President Trump. And I want to get to one specific quote. As I just mentioned, this tax increase that Biden's talking about that will supposedly pay for this quote-unquote infrastructure bill, this Trojan horse. I see your time, Non-Fake News. Thanks. I'll subscribe to you so I'll at least know when you go live. So then I can try to pick it up if I have the opportunity. Thank you again. Anyway, so this tax increase would raise our corporate tax rate to 3% higher than China's. We'll be at 28%. China's currently at 25%. And I have an article later on about how China's seeking to replace the U.S. dollar with the Chinese yuan. It also has another name called the renminbi as the U.S. reserve. As the world's reserve currency. We'll get into that later on. But President Trump had this to say about this Trojan horse and the tax increases specifically. Quote, Joe Biden's radical plan to implement the largest tax hike in American history is a massive giveaway to China and many other countries that will send thousands of factories, millions of jobs, and trillions of dollars to these competitive nations. Continuing, the Biden plan will crush American workers and decimate U.S. manufacturing while giving special tax privileges to outsourcers, foreign, and giant multinational corporations. Now, I will say, there's an interesting point in this article that I found kind of a brain tickler. It says here, economists at Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce have said the Biden plan would create millions of jobs and help rebuild the economy after the pandemic. Okay, the economy is already rebuilding after the pandemic. We know that because the unemployment figures are fairly steady, although we did get more jobless claims last week, than we expected to. But the economy is recovering as more and more states open up their economies. We don't need all of this money being stripped from profits to pay for this stuff, to jumpstart the economy. The economy's doing fine on its own. By spending all this money and taxing corporations higher, we're going to lower the economy. We're going to create fewer jobs. We're going to create more unemployment. Add that to all of the handouts they're going to start giving people. We talked about the new child tax credits available for anyone making, I believe, less than $75,000 a year to basically not have to work and to promote having children, because the more children you have, the more money you get. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? I think they called it welfare. Also, they're going to subsidize child care, which means that the wages for child care workers are going to go up, which means then that the child care centers are going to be more reliant on federal funding to support their workforce, which means ultimately they're going to have to raise the prices for child care. It's a vicious cycle. And the Democrats never understand that, ever. So President Trump nails this, absolutely nails this. So as I said, right now, the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. If you want to do business across the world, you're ultimately going to have to do business in dollars at one point or another. It is the standard currency. Now, we used to be on the gold standard, which meant every dollar was backed by a certain amount of physical gold. But we were taken off the gold standard by Nixon, I believe, in 1972, which then made it lawful for U.S. citizens to own gold. Before that, it was a very tricky process to own gold, unless you were a coin collector. But then after that, you could buy gold. And you may or may not remember, when gold was initially available for sale in the U.S., it went for $35 an ounce. $35 an ounce. I told my father at the time, you have got to buy gold. It is only going to go up. I was 11 at the time, and I said, you've got to buy gold. And his response was, unfortunately, what you hear from many people who feel they don't have the money to invest, he said, we don't have the money. Imagine if he had just bought an ounce, a gold coin ounce once a month. I mean, I remember when gold hit $800 an ounce and people thought that the world was going to end. And now it's depressed at just over $1,700 an ounce. Now, China has gold. China's buying gold by the bucket load right now. They're doing all they can to back up their currency with hard assets. China also has a nasty habit, however, of devaluing their currency, which makes them more competitive on the world market because then their goods cost less. So there is a professor, associate dean to be specific, from the School of International Studies at Renmin University in Beijing. And this is a pretty big piece from the Epoch Times by Nicole Howe and Kathy He on Dong Sheng. His name is D. Dong Sheng, about how Dong Sheng is promoting China replacing the U.S. dollar with their currency. And he calls it the renminbi as opposed to the yuan. I've never seen that before until I read this article. Now, it goes into different things that China's going to do to try to get their currency to be the number one in the world. And it's all ins and outs. Some of it I read twice and I still didn't quite understand. Two things to take note of, though. One, the Chinese bond market right now has a higher interest yield than the U.S. bond market. It has for some months now, which means it's attracting more investments than the U.S. bond market because they're promising higher yields. Now, of course, you have to count on China to not devalue their currency and thereby devalue your investment. So it's a tricky trade, but that is happening right now. That is happening. Here's the part that really concerned me, though. According to the data, and again quoting the article, compiled by the International Monetary Institute of Renmin University, the Chinese yuan's share of global payments increased from 0.02% in 2011 to over 3% in 2020. That is a little over, or right around, I should say, a 1.5. 1, 2. A 1,500% increase, if I'm doing the math right. A 1,500% increase in the share of global payments for the Chinese currency in just 9 years. That is worrisome. That is worrisome. Now, it's only 3%. Obviously, the U.S. has the lion's share of that market. But with all the spending that we're doing right now, with all of this top-down economy shaping that the Democrats are trying to force through Congress right now, our economy is headed for the shitter. And China is holding the reins right now. They are using their One Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, to put coastal countries in debt up to their eyeballs and thereby taking over their entire infrastructure. If you go to a port city on the east coast of Africa right now that was and the infrastructure was built by the Chinese, there are no locals working on that facility. It's all Chinese. Those Italian, quote-unquote, designer clothes factories in northern Italy, those are owned by China. Those labels are owned by China. And all those clothes are produced by Chinese foreign workers in Italy. That's why Italy had such a huge blow-up of the Wuhan virus last year, because of all the workers from China flying into Italy after the Lunar New Year. You remember, China cut off all transportation between the Wuhan province and the rest of China in late December, early January 2019, 2020. We're right in there. But they allowed international travel. That's how the virus spread. So now we're giving them an even greater percentage of profits by raising our corporate tax rates while theirs stay the same. This is not good. This is not good. And hello, comfy friend in the Trovo chat. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I will mention to those of you in the Trovo chat, I highly recommend you think about moving over to the DLive channel. I am broadcasting now on YouTube, DLive, and Trovo at the same time. I will give you the address to the DLive channel here in the Trovo chat, just in case you're interested. I do the entire show on both DLive and Trovo at the end of the day. I cut off there. Yes, comfy friend, I had left DLive. You are correct. DLive fixed things. Not too long ago, DLive fixed things. I am now remonetized on DLive, and they have a new structure as far as broadcast classifications go. So now instead of just having an X tag and an all for all, if you will, free for everyone system, they've added a second layer, which is known as the mature audience only. And that's what I'm broadcasting under now on DLive's mature audience only. And it works great. It works great. You're certainly welcome to stay with Trovo if you like, but everybody really, really enjoys DLive a lot more. The microtransactions are better, and it has a better chat too. Just saying. But of course, it is totally up to you. I am considering stopping broadcasting on Trovo in a few weeks because I'm not getting any new viewers on Trovo at all. But I won't stop right away, I promise. All right, continuing right along with the news rodeo. I'll just skip this. We've gone over all of that. So, what are the Democrats going to do to get this massive white elephant through Congress? They've already used reconciliation once, right? And you can only use it once a year, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. Chuck Schumer's got a plan to get around that. An article here from theblaze.com by Chris Pandolfo. So basically, in order to overcome the filibuster, the 60-vote minimum to get a bill through the Senate that's not a budget bill, that's not reconciliation, you can only do it once a year. Well, they want to figure out a way to do it as often as possible, as often as they want to, thereby reducing the Senate to another House of Representatives where only a majority is necessary to pass any legislation. As I've said before, the Senate is supposed to be, our Senate specifically, is supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world. Because that's where crazy stuff from the House goes to be worked on and settled down and turned into actual, hopefully, decent legislation. Hopefully. Doesn't happen all the time, but it should. We've abrogated a lot of Congress's responsibilities to the courts, which is a damn shame, because we've seen what happened to the courts in the past few months. So, what about reconciliation since they've already used it once? Well, here's where it gets crazy. Again, quoting the article, Chris Pandolfo from theblaze.com. Last year, Congress failed to pass a budget resolution, so Democrats used their fiscal year 2021 budget reconciliation to pass the $2 trillion American Relief Act. Okay, we know that. But they can still use the fiscal year 2022 budget reconciliation this year to pass either infrastructure or tax increases, a climate bill, additional health care reform, whatever. Whatever. They've still got another bite at the apple this year. Now, we've been told over and over again that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, Democrats from West Virginia and Arizona, respectively, will not ever vote to end the filibuster in the Senate. Manchin has made noise that he would be willing to recreate the old form of the filibuster where you have to be physically speaking on the floor in order for the filibuster to be in effect. And as soon as you stop talking, then a vote can be made for cloture, which means the bill would go to the House would go to the floor for a vote, and that only needs a majority to close for cloture, which means the Democrats would all vote for, the Republicans would all vote against, and then Harris would come in and cast the tie-breaking vote. But Schumer is talking about going to the Senate parliamentarian and asking for a very specific thing. They want to use Section 304 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to allow for a second reconciliation process this fiscal year. The parliamentarian is an expert on the obscure procedures of the Senate and can determine whether certain actions are permitted under Senate rules. Now, if the parliamentarian agrees with Schumer's argument, then they can use budget reconciliation as many times as they please. But even if the parliamentarian disagrees, according to the article, Schumer still has options. They can pass the fiscal year 2022 budget resolution this year and the 2023 budget resolution next year, giving them an opportunity to use budget reconciliation at least twice more during Biden's term. And they can also vote to overrule the parliamentarian's interpretation of the Senate rules. Thereby, they could create a new precedent that becomes the Senate rule on budget reconciliation. In the short term, this would mean Democrats can advance more bills without the threat of a filibuster, but in the long run, they may come to regret doing so when Republicans have a majority and recapture the White House. And that's what we told Harry Reid how many years ago when he went for the nuclear option on judicial appointees. Mitch McConnell stood on the Senate floor and told Harry Reid to his face, "You don't know what you're doing. You will not have control of the Senate forever. It will pass to us ultimately, and then we'll be able to do what you don't want us to do." And that's what happened. And we got a record number of federal judges through the Senate, during Trump's 4 years, thanks fully and wholly to Harry Reid's nuking the filibuster on judicial appointees. Now remember, back in the day, judicial appointees rarely got filibustered at all. And then along came Robert Bork. Judge Bork was nominated to be Supreme Court Justice, and the Democrats decided that the Supreme Court could not become run by conservatives, and they absolutely destroyed Robert Bork. Ted Kennedy lied horribly about what would happen if Bork became a SCOTUS justice. Ted Kennedy literally said that if Bork were appointed, there would be back alley abortions, and police would be allowed to break in your door and arrest you for things you did in your bedroom. Those are quotes. Those were complete lies. It was such a horrible process. They so damaged Robert Bork's reputation, who was known as one of the most brilliant jurists in America at the time, that it became a verb, what they did to him. It's called borking. And they wasted no time in borking Clarence Thomas. If it had been for Clarence Thomas's standing up for himself in a very strong and quite potently worded monologue on the Senate floor in front of the Judiciary Committee, he wouldn't have gotten on the Supreme Court, and Lord knows where we'd be now if that hadn't happened. And you remember the case of a Hispanic federal judge who was going to be nominated to the D.C. District Court of Appeals, which is known as the second highest court in America. The D.C. Circuit is where Supreme Court justices are groomed. It's basically the farm team for SCOTUS. I apologize for not remembering this gentleman's name. I do apologize. But he had the cardinal sin of being the first Hispanic who was going to be appointed to the D.C. Circuit, who happened to also be a Republican. And the Democrats said outright, we have the communications between them. They said outright that they couldn't let that happen because they couldn't let the Republicans have that skin of being the first ones to appoint a Hispanic to a district court. That is what they did. That is what they did. Yet we're the racists. We're the racists. Seriously. All right, I teased this at in the thumbnail for today. I almost didn't get to it, but you guys will remember that back on February 23rd, Tiger Woods crashed an SUV. He went across 2 lanes of traffic on a boulevard and then crossed back over, went over the curb, and rolled down an embankment, rolling the car several times. They got him out of the vehicle, transported him to the hospital. He had serious leg injuries, including a comminuted fracture of, I believe, his right leg, which means it was not only broken in several spots, but the bones were sticking out through the skin. I haven't heard anything about his rehabilitation since then, but the accident was investigated immediately, as is always the case. Here's the thing, though. I just found out a couple things today from this article from the Epoch Times from their AP wire. Seems that the detectives did not serve a warrant on Tiger for blood and urine samples for toxicology tests, which is standard for crashes such as that, especially single vehicle crashes, single occupancy crashes. They didn't do that. So there's never going to be a tox report on what was in Tiger's system at the time. Now, I'm not casting aspersions specifically, but we all know that Tiger is a recovering painkiller addict. He did rehab time not too long ago for a painkiller addiction stemming from his chronic back problem. I thank God I never developed a painkiller addiction, even though I've been on painkillers basically since the 80s. I don't know how that happened, but thank God for it. But the detectives from the LA County Sheriff's Office have completed their investigation into the crash, and they have made it a determination. Here's the thing, though. We're not going to know what that is. They're not telling. According to Sheriff Alex Villanueva, let me scroll down here. A cause has been determined. The investigation has concluded. But we reached out to Tiger Woods and his personnel. There are some privacy issues on releasing information on the investigation, so we're going to ask them if they waive the privacy, and then we will be able to do a full release on all information regarding the accident. We have all the contents of the black box. We've got everything. It's completed, signed, sealed, and delivered. However, we can't release it without the permission of the people involved in the collision. Close quote. There you go. I'd like to quote Melissa 3838 in the chat, in the DLive chat. That entire sheriff department is corrupt. Absolutely. Absolutely. You find me a public servant in LA County that isn't on the take in one way or another. I can't go any further than that. That's all I need to say about that. I'm sure you all understand. All right. That is the end of the broadcast part of the show. I'm going to turn off YouTube and kick over to the DLive and Trovo portion of the rest of the show, known colloquially as the after show. So I would like to say goodbye to YouTube. Thank you for being here. We will be back with you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern for the Friday edition of the All Hat No Cattle Daily News Rodeo. Bye-bye.